everyone, and welcome to episode 173 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Now, October the 21st, which of course was last week, but it's actually the day that we're recording this on, is National Apple Day, a day dedicated to all things Apple, from pies to cider. So I thought it would be a good time to focus on fruit farmers. And I'm joined today by someone who everyone involved in the fruit world, I'm sure will know, Ali Capper. Ali farms 100 acres of apples and 100 acres of hops in Worcestershire. She has also had numerous wider industry roles, including being director of the British Hop Association, chair of the NFU's National Horticulture Potatoes Board, chair of the English Apples and Pears, chairman of Y Hops, and numerous others. She's also trustee of the Nuffield Farming Scholarships Trust. She's a Nuffield scholar herself and a non-exec director of NFU Mutual. She's a keen walker and walked the length of Offers Dyke this year. Fun fact. And another fun fact about Ali is that she has 17 first cousins, which is a lot of cousins, certainly compared to my family. Ali, welcome to Meet the Farmers. How's your week going?
Not too bad. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure and a thrill. Now, it's a big question to start with. Does an apple a day really keep the doctor away? How many times have you been asked that?
It really does, even though we're not allowed to add on the keeps the doctor away piece now. So when I'm talking about this for the apple industry, we talk about an apple a day a lot.
Okay.
But the health benefits of eating an apple a day are amazing. It's full of fibre, which is great for your gut health. They are full of flavonoids and antioxidants, which is fantastic for your heart health and your cardiovascular system. And they are also 86% water. So if you're out and about and you have forgotten your bottle of water, if you've got an apple in your pocket, you will stay hydrated. And they are also great for your teeth, good for your hair. I could go on and on.
Yeah.
But an apple a day really is fantastic.
So you're in Worcestershire. Tell us about Worcestershire. I don't think we've actually had someone on from Worcestershire for a little while. So what's the landscape like?
So we're right on the Herefordshire-Worcestershire border. We're in what I would describe as the sort of Herefordshire end of Worcestershire. So our landscape is beautiful. We've got these deep red soils, very rolling. And we look at the Malvern Hills. It is properly beautiful here.
Yeah, Arches country.
Oh, well, Elgar's route, Arches country. It's just stunning. Everybody that comes is blown away by how beautiful it is.
And your farm, is it a family farm?
It is. I mean, Richard and I talk about being the custodians for the current, as the current generation. His father bought the farm in 1962, but the farm has been farming hops and apples for well over 250 years.
Oh, wow. Blimey. And how does that compare with sort of a lot of orchards now?
So I think there are lots of other farms in Herefordshire that could make similar claims. There are a lot of long-standing orchardists around here. But I guess we're just on very good soil. We've got lovely, deep, fertile soil. And we are in that lovely microclimate in the foothills of the Malverns, which means that we get fantastic natural rainfall, even in a year like this.
Yeah.
We have grown a fab crop of both hops and apples. I don't know if you remember that map of the UK during the drought, and it was all brown, and there was a tiny little green line.
Yeah, of course.
Richard and I realised that was us.
Oh, wow. I always like speaking to people who come into farming but have a slightly different background. And I didn't know this, obviously, before you told me in the sort of research for this, but you did a Bachelor of Education in Fashion and Textiles, and you wanted to teach, but then you ended up farming. So what happened?
Well, it's been quite a journey, actually. I'm a farmer's daughter.
Okay.
So I grew up on a farm. We were farming arable sheep. My father was very involved in ploughing and ploughing matches, which is obviously very uncool now. And he was also very into his kit and machinery, and he did his fair share of agricultural engineering for other people. So I grew up in this world, but to be perfectly honest, it was just never deemed an option. I loved I was a very creative person, and I thought I wanted to teach, and off I went to college, and realised when I got there, it wasn't that I didn't want to teach, it was more that I wanted to just check that there wasn't something else to do.
Yeah.
Before I left school and went back to school, as it were. And I ended up in London, and completely by accident ended up in an advertising and marketing career, in which I did really well. I guess the creativity came out, the creative flair. But really loved that period of my life. But it's so different to now. I mean, I was living in, I lived all over London, but mostly in central London, and was working really hard, long hours, and working for all sorts of amazing businesses.
Yeah.
I realise now how lucky I was, but I worked for most of our major retailers at one point or another, quite a lot of our high street banks. I launched Heathrow Express, did a lot in the travel sector. So, yeah, it was an amazing time.
Yeah. And you were there for what, sort of 15 years-ish?
Yeah. It's a young person's game, advertising and marketing. And I was part of an agency that sold out to Sir Martin Sorrell, to WPP, and was put on the inevitable earn-out for 3 years. And when that was over, I retired gracefully back to Herefordshire. Well, I didn't retire financially, but decided it was time to move out.
Yeah. You obviously worked with all those companies, and you took a vast amount of different experiences from that. And I'm guessing you can still use a lot of that sort of knowledge experience today, just in a different way. But what did you learn from that time that you still use today?
Let's just talk about when I started getting involved in the farm business here, which was completely by accident. When Richard and I met, I was running an online business. This was in the early 2000s. The book on the farm left just after I had had our youngest daughter. And Richard asked me if I'd get involved. So I got involved in the numbers first. And actually, that's when I put my London hat back on, because I was very often asked to come in and look at businesses and their problems and challenges and solve them. And so I just started applying the same approach here. And I started asking really difficult questions like, why are we growing these two apple varieties? They're both costing us the same to produce, but this one is returning half of this one.
Okay.
What's that all about? So I started asking the difficult questions, and then I realised that there were quite a lot of issues actually in the wider industry, particularly in hops. I realised that we were hiding in the warehouse as a British industry. There was no logo, there was no website, there was no story. And so I started to apply my comms, sales, marketing background. So I did completely relaunch the British hop industry and gave it a website, built a logo, did a whole, there's an Oxford Farming Conference speech on that, because I did, that was a whole world of work back in 2012, 13, 14.
Were you surprised at the time that didn't exist?
I quite frankly couldn't believe it, but there's an awful lot in farming that it is really hard to believe still. I mean, I think it's like I still feel that I'm able to bring a fresh perspective. And having worked in so many other different industry sectors, I was very lucky to be, in the agency world. It gives you the ability to do that.
Let's talk about the sort of farming year for anyone who sort of doesn't know sort of growing process and that sort of thing, including me. Especially for hops. So what does a farming year look like for someone who grows apples and hops?
Well, we're talking now on the 21st of October, and we've almost finished our harvest. We've still got some of our cider apple harvest to do. And as we go into the winter, I think everybody thinks we get a rest.
Yeah.
But we have got hundreds of thousands of trees on this farm.
Yeah. And
during the winter, our most important job is pruning, because to grow the crop, you need really good light management. And so making sure that each tree, or in the case of our commercial eating apples, where we're growing them on a post and wire work system in rows, serried ranks. So each tree is not really an individual in that system. You have a row of fruit. And every winter, we are looking at the structure to make sure that for the following year, we're going to be able to get the maximum light into the crop. So the winter is really important. We're preening. In the hops, we do a lot of wire work maintenance. Okay. We also take, in the hops, there is a little bit of the bine that is left after harvest. And there's the final job of the year is to do the bine cutting, where we cut that back to the ground to prevent any disease going back down into the root. Because, of course, with both of our crops, they're there year round. They're perennial. Yeah. We don't plant again next year. So making sure that they go into the winter in the right way is really important. I guess from a weather point of view, what we want in the winter is lots of cold weather, because chill hours are really important to fruit and hop growers. So we do need, and that's, we need a certain number of hours below an average of 7 degrees centigrade. So we're looking for around about 1,500 hours is, about the minimum for apples and hops. So that's the winter. Come the spring, that's when it all just starts to go with a bang, because the apple orchards come into blossom. And what's critical there is that you've got the pollinators in the orchard, and they're in blossom. And there are all sorts of insects and wildlife that are important to us. Everybody thinks about bees in beehives, and we do have hundreds of beehives dotted through the farm. But actually, solitary bees are very important to apple growers. So we have lots of little bee hotels and places for solitary bees to hang out. Okay. And with the hops, as the plant starts to emerge, what we need to do is create the framework for the crop to grow up. And that is string, literally, it's coir string. And it's one man with a massive ball of coir string and a pole with a hook on the end. It's called a monkey. Okay. And the our hop stringers use that pole to create a framework between a hook in the ground and a hook on the top wire, and literally going up and down, creating a zigzag effect to create that framework. And then as we move forward into the later part of the thing, we're hop training. So as the hops grow, we're taking the strongest shoots and sending 2 or 3 clockwise up every shoot, up every string. And with the apples, June is quite a tricky month. If we've got through spring frosts, and we do worry a lot about spring frosts with fruit because it literally knocks the blossom off, and that's the end of your crop. So that's not ideal. But June's quite an interesting month for apple growers because we have something called the June drop. And during June, the tiny little fruitlets that have formed after the blossom has fallen off, in June they can drop if they haven't had really good pollination or if there was a touch of frost, all sorts of reasons. So we hold our breath during June and hope that the June drop is just right. We do need some of the baby fruitlets to drop off.
Gosh, there's a lot of holding breath, isn't there?
Oh, huge amounts of anxiety and tension. And then during the summer, our job really is to protect the crop. And most of what we're doing is protecting it from our mild maritime climate that brings us lots of fungal issues. So we've got scab on apples, and then we've got mildews on the hops. So we do have a crop protection program, but it's very much driven by IPM, integrated pest management. And the little pests and the little critters that come at us, there's all sorts of things we're using there, biologicals and clever things we're using to try and spray as little as possible. So, for example, some of the moths that we have, we put out little discs to the orchard and they sterilise the male moths, and that stops the population exploding and we don't need to spray. Wow. So there's all sorts of clever things like that going on. And then our harvest for apples and hops starts at the end of August. And from the end of August until middle of November, we are flat out here and bringing everything in. The apples, for the eating apples, we're obviously bringing those in by hand. They're all picked individually. And the brief to our pickers is to pick them like an egg, to really be very careful because we don't want any bruising. And with the hops, that's a mechanical harvest. We take the whole plant, all 16 to 18 foot of it, out of the hop yard and to a static picking machine where the vine is stripped. And the leaf and hop is then separated by a big machine called a brough, which was amazingly manufactured here in our village. And the brough machines are all over the world now. With the hops, we then dry the crop here and bale it. And with the eating apples, they go into bins and go straight as fast as possible into cold store, because we obviously want to be able to sell them through the winter and into next spring and early summer. And then the cider apples is the final one, and that's an automated harvest where we have, first of all, we have a piece of kit on a tractor that comes along. It's like it grabs the trunk of the tree and shakes it, and all the apples fall to the floor. And then there's a blower that comes through and puts the apples into nice, neat, serried ranks, and the harvester can then come through and sweep those up.
I have seen that happen. It's absolutely incredible. As a process.
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, the mechanical harvests for horticultural crops are amazing. All of them, and I've been lucky enough this charitable board to see all sorts of different harvests. And so our year is busy year round. Actually,
I imagine you're pretty reliant on seasonal labour, which is of course quite hot in the news, and has been for quite a while. So how is that situation for you as a business?
Yeah, it's been an issue that I've lived and breathed as a member of the NFU's Horticulture and Potatoes Board, and we've been okay this year. We were short earlier on in the season, just about got through harvest. There's never enough people. There's always too much overtime. There's just such a lack of understanding by government. Seasonal labour is work that doesn't suit the resident population of a first world economy, and that's not a UK specific issue. It's the same in all first world economies all around the world. If you are living in a first world economy and need to pay a mortgage or rent, you need year-round work. And seasonal work, peaks and troughs, it comes and goes. So on our farm, we need 70 people for a 7-week period in August to October. And then we need 12 people from April to June, and we might need 15 people for a task in the summer. So it's very peaky and troughy. And it's exactly the same on all other fruit and veg, plant and flower enterprises across the UK and across the world. And every other country in the world has got a scheme that brings seasonal labour. And we do have a scheme. I'm very proud of our scheme. I've worked really hard to get that scheme for the industry. But it doesn't bring enough people. It's very hand to mouth because the government, whilst it's given a degree of permanence now to the end of 2024, the numbers are not known still. Here we are on October the 21st, and the sector doesn't know how many people are coming next year. I mean, we could talk for a long time about business uncertainty, but our sector has been dealing with a lack of certainty around its labour force for a number of years now. And it's just ridiculous because for horticultural businesses, our business, about 40 to 50% of our turnover is labour. For an asparagus grower, it can be as much as 70%.
Of course.
So if you don't know where that's coming from, that's like an arable farmer not knowing where his seed and fertilizer is coming from. You can't operate in such an uncertain environment. So we need to get the policy framework around seasonal labour resolved in this country.
Let's just go back to hops, and I'm interested in what brewers are looking for in terms of quality. What do they want?
So a brewer buys the hop on the rub and the sniff. What do I mean by that? When we bale our crop, we bale it into 60 kilo bales. Only the very largest brewers take bales of hops directly from farm. Most brewers, that bale is then co-packed down into either a 20 kilo silver vac pack or a 5 kilo pack. And what's really important with hops is that they are packed and stored where the light is taken out and the air is taken out. Otherwise, they deteriorate. And when a brewer gets hold of hops, they literally put them in their hands and they rub between their palms,
Yeah.
and then they snip from the palm of their hands. Because what that action does is the rubbing between the palm of your hands releases all the oils, and the warmth of the hands releases the oils. And then when you sniff, you can really get the flavour and the aromas that are going on in that hop.
Okay, so there is a bit of an art to it then as well.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
If you stand at a trade stand talking about hops to brewers, it's like talking to slightly mad professors or quite out there chefs. I love brewers. They're so passionate about their raw ingredients. And they literally, I mean, I've had brewers stand in front of me on trade stands. They're literally covered in hops, got hops everywhere, and they're trying to find new flavours all the time. You do want to be able to identify that it is a hop cone. It's not just dust or petals. And they want a nice green crop that's clean, but it's all about the flavour. It's all about the aroma. And they're looking for citrus, they're looking for tropical fruit flavours, they're looking for sage and pine, chocolate, molasses. There are so many flavours in hops. A good brewer can take those flavours and aromatics from the hop and take them through into the beer. That's where the clever stuff happens.
Okay.
And the craze for highly hopped beers, pale ales, IPAs, manna from heaven to a hop grower. We love craft brewers because they want to use lots of hops, and they really care about the provenance. They really care about the taste and the flavour of those hops. And more, they're caring about the carbon footprint, which is obviously really important to us as British hop growers, because there are a lot of imported hops coming in.
Yeah.
And those imported hops coming with a really heavy carbon footprint.
What about your apples? Who's buying those? And I suppose a question on that as well. Yeah, what makes the grade and which ones don't, and what you do with those that don't make the grade?
So I think if I were representing apple growers in the UK, I think there's a lot of frustration that the UK retailers have really all aligned around a very similar specification, which is quite tight now. Really, there's no point picking an apple that's under 55 millimetres in diameter, and there's no point picking an apple that's over 80 millimetres. And we do literally have sizing rings.
Wow.
And if the apple drops through it, it's too small, and an apple won't go through the 80 mil ring, you don't pick it.
Okay.
Why not? Because if you put fruit that's out of specification in the bin, you might as well put pound notes on it, because it's just costing you money to put through quite an expensive packing process.
Yeah, of course.
So the specifications are quite tight. I mean, on one hand, I get it. Consumers buy with their eyes. They want the right colour. They want a nice, clean skin finish. And we do want uniformity in the fruit and vegetables that we buy. That's what I see. I see consumers doing that when I walk around the supermarket. What about wonky fruit? Let's just talk about wonky fruit and wonky veg. I personally loathe it, because whilst it does bring that food through the supply chain, it is at the cost of growers usually.
Yeah.
Because the price that's afforded by retailers to those lines is very low. And whilst it's good that the food doesn't go to waste, I would argue that is starting to put fresh produce businesses out of business.
Okay, and again, what happens with the apples that either stay on the branch or stay on the ground?
If they get into the pack house, they do not go for waste. They will go for juice.
Yeah.
And even in most of the pack houses that I'm aware of, even the rotten apples, the out of spec, not fit for juice apples, will often go for animal feed, for pig feed. So there's very little waste once it gets into the pack house. A lot of growers like us will choose not to pick the fruit that's out of specification in order to maximise their profitability. We feed the birds with that fruit. It falls to the ground naturally. And actually, it's amazing here in the winter, because it's often a relatively small amount of fruit. It might be 3 or 5% of what you've picked overall. But when that falls to the floor, and in the dead of winter, you get fly-ins of waxwings and all sorts of beautiful birds. It's amazing. And in fact, walking around the farm, I often find people who've come down from Birmingham, which is an hour away, just to see the birds. So I'm quite proud of the fact that we feed the birds. I would like more of that fruit to go into a profitable sale. But if that profitable sale isn't available, we'll look after the local environment.
We've mentioned labour, we've mentioned climate to a certain extent, but what are your biggest challenges on farm?
Inflation. Inflation's almost unbearable. I mean, we've been given this year by the government, we were given 15% inflation on our labour cost because they decided to design a new wage rate for the seasonal labour scheme. So instead of the benchmark being the national living wage at £9.50 an hour, the government created a benchmark of £10.10. So together with the national insurance rise, that's given us 15% increase in labour cost, where we've been short of labour and we've had to employ a lot of overtime, where we've had a lot of new people and we haven't got the benefit of people returning with knowledge and there's more training. That 15% often becomes 20%. 20% inflation on 50% of your turnover. Now, just let those figures land. They are massive. Fuel and energy. We need energy to dry hops. We saw a significant inflation in that actually at the end of last year. For our harvest last year, our gas price went from 26 pence a litre to 52 between a delivery at the end of July and a delivery in early September. So that's double. It doubled during our harvest last year, and it's remained high ever since. I don't need to talk to you about fertiliser. And then, of course, there's the energy cost to store our apples because all the retailers want a British crop available from now all the way through until next May, June, July. And we use electricity. A lot of it's renewable. There is quite a lot of solar panels, but we still have to buy electricity because, of course, we're generating that renewable electricity in the summer, but we need it in the winter, if that makes sense, because we're storing the crop from September through to March. So the inflation is unbearable. And I think we're not alone. There are a lot of businesses that are really questioning their future because it feels like we're subsidising cheap food. We're not making any money. We're making less and less money every year. And certainly during COVID, if I just reflect on that for a minute, COVID closed the pubs for 10 months, all told. Beer went down the drain twice at the start of the first lockdown and then again in Christmas 2020. I don't know if you remember all this.
Yes.
And when brewers are putting beer down the drain, they're not buying hops. So we effectively grew half a crop 2 years in a row to try and help the industry out. What that means now is we need significantly higher prices because we've built lending, actually. We've built debt during that period. We can't afford to go on like that.
Do you see that coming? Do you see those prices coming?
We're negotiating. If they don't, we won't be here. We'll stop doing it. We've been quite clear about that through our supply chain. We love growing hops. We're really good at it and we want to stay doing it. But we've got to see prices that match the costs and that make up for 2 years of losses. That's obviously a very hard message to brewers who are also facing significant inflation in their energy costs, which is, it's a big one for brewers. But we can't. We're not a charity. Can't keep producing apples and hops and not making money. So I think we're not alone here. Hop growers in the UK have reached a critical turning point. I know of 4. There's only 59 hop growers in the UK. I know of 4 that have decided to stop. That's nearly 10% of the industry.
Wow.
We mustn't allow more. We've got to achieve better prices and we've got to achieve 3-5 year contracts so that growers have got some certainty. And
with your NFU hat on, and I suppose your other industry hats on as well, how confident are you at the moment that will actually be achieved?
We're facing into a really difficult market, aren't we? And the political chaos that is going on in the UK at the moment.
So we haven't even mentioned that.
that I am an eternal optimist. And even when Brexit happened, I did think that common sense would prevail out of all the madness. I am beginning to wonder now.
Let's try and get some positive, get some positive on the podcast. I want to hear from you about food pairings and beer. Yeah, give us some classic and some perhaps some more unusual beer to food pairings.
So the way I always think about it is, and there is a beer for everyone. There are thousands of beer styles.
Yeah.
And I must admit, when I met and married Richard, met my hop grower, I wasn't particularly a beer drinker, and that has completely changed. So let's think about the feed. What would I have with roast beef? Well, if we were thinking about this through the lens of wine, you'd choose a lovely deep red wine to have with your roast beef. So the same thing applies. You want a beer with a nice deep flavour character, and you probably want something with a depth of colour.
Yeah.
So I would choose a porter or a red amber ale to have with my roast beef. If I was having curry, I'd want something quite light, something palate cleansing. So I'd probably choose a nice crisp pale ale.
Yeah.
I wouldn't choose a lager. I'm not a fan of lager.
Okay. The classic other one is a Pilsner or something, isn't it? But
yeah. Well, there are some nice British lagers emerging now, but I would choose a lovely pale ale. One of my favourites is Herefordshire Pale Ale, which is a Wye Valley Pale Ale. Okay. And we've got a brewery on the farm, and they do a Pekin Pale Ale, which is really lovely with a curry.
Nice.
With cheese, I would choose something with some depth of character. So a really nice punchy IPA.
Okay.
Some tropical fruit notes in an IPA with cheese is a really good combination. In fact, we grow, just as a sort of parallel, we grow a really lovely apple called Sunburst, which has got quite a tropical flavour to it, and it's fantastic with cheese.
Okay. I will note both of those. I'm doing Cheese a Day challenge again in February next year for February Dairy. So I probably will get in touch actually and ask for some specific beer and apple pairings.
No problem at all. I didn't cover pudding. If I was wanting a beer to go with pudding, I would choose something with a higher alcohol content.
Okay.
So some of the specialist vintage beers that have been laid down, like wine and stored, and are at their optimum at year 10 or year 15, are often 9 or 10%. And they come in all sorts of flavours and characters. But that's the sort of beer I would choose to have with a pudding. Something with, a nice alcohol content.
That does not sound a bad thing at all. Yeah, tell me about what you like about long distance walking. You recently did Offa's Dyke, but this is a thing that you really enjoy doing.
Yeah, I do love it, actually. I've got a walk around the village that I do. So I live in a village called Suckley, and I've got 3 girlfriends who are all in the village. We call ourselves the Suckley Stompers.
Nice.
We rarely all walk together, but we've got a WhatsApp group, and if somebody's up for a walk, somebody's going for a walk, we just let each other know, and if we can join in, we do. That's how it works. And we've got a sort of 4-mile route around the village. We do regularly, and that's a sort of quite a few times a week. We're so lucky here. We've got the Malvern Hills. We sometimes walk to the top of the Malverns and walk back to Suckley. We've got the Worcestershire Way behind me, and we'll often do a leg of that.
Nice. Yeah.
Offa's Dyke. That was I blame my brother Paddy Kennedy. That was his idea. He was 50 this year, and in his 40th year, he did some really mad things. He ran a marathon and did the 3 peaks. So this year, when he turned 50, I said, "So what mad challenges are you going to do this year?" And he said, "We're going to walk Offa's Dyke." And actually, you've said I've completed it. We haven't quite. We've done quite a lot of it, but we haven't completed.
How far is it? It's really long, isn't it?
The actual dike is about 81 miles, but the walk is 173.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's quite significant. And then I've got a plan. I want to walk Hadrian's Wall, or certainly the more interesting part of it next year. But what I love about it is it clears the head. I mean, apart from the exercise is fantastic, especially if you go at a reasonable pace. From a mental health, having the headspace point of view, I just think you can't beat it. And I guess I took to it actually in COVID. When COVID struck, I was chair of the Horticulture and Potatoes Board of the NFU, and there literally were crises everywhere I looked.
Yeah.
The chip shops had closed, so the potato growers were on their knees. The garden centres closed, so all of the nurseries and plant growers were on their knees. For 3 weeks, we thought the borders were going to close, so there was going to be no labour able to come in April. That's what all starts arriving. And then the furlough scheme was launched. And again, initially at the beginning of the furlough scheme, if an individual took the furlough scheme, they weren't going to be allowed to do any other job. It was literally just crisis after crisis.
It was horrific. It was truly horrific.
It was. And I had growers ringing in desperation from 6:30 in the morning until 10:30 at night. And it kept me sane, and it kept me able to cope with taking on all that angst and trying to navigate with the NFU and with DEFRA solutions. We had to find solutions to all these problems. And if you've got crises emerging at that rate, and with the need to respond urgently, quickly, you've got to stay sane. So it's my sanity.
I know exactly what you mean by that. I did the Suffolk Coast Path with a couple of mates. Gosh, must be 4 years ago of that. And I said after that, I love doing this. I'm going to do some more. And it was the thing that was so stark as a contrast to everyday life it's that different pace that you see the world. And it's a cliche, but it really is. You notice so much more. You see a landscape in a very different light.
Yeah, you do. And I think everyone should walk. The whole 10,000 steps a day. Personally, don't think it really counts if you're doing that on the underground or in a city. It's not the same as walking in a green space. And you've just got to work hard to diary it. You've got to make it happen that's how I make it happen. I'll often look at my diary for the day or the week and think, where am I walking in amongst all these mad things that I've got to do and all these places I've got to get to. So nice. I make time to walk.
Nice. We're going to start to wrap things up. I love this discussion. But two questions which I always ask everyone who comes on. First is, Ali Kapper, a message for the public. Any message, what would it be?
My British, don't worry. I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I, with apples and hops. They're grown in distinctly significant parts of our country. They're grown in Herefordshire and Worcestershire and Kent predominantly. Buy local when you live on an island as small as the UK is buying British. Check the provenance, support British farmers. If you can't read the package without your glasses on, take your glasses to the supermarket and make sure that the tender stem broccoli, the green beans, the apples, the pears, the strawberries, that tiny little black writing on the packaging, that it says UK or Great Britain.
And a message for farmers.
Dig deep. It's tough at the moment. It's really hard. I think lots of farmers are really questioning. Let's go back to the political uncertainty. Let's go back to the complete unknown of what is happening beyond BPS. Actually not that significant for our farm, but for many farms it is very significant. The question marks now around elms and the future of all of that. So dig deep, dig in, I think would be my message, because we are the custodians for now on each of our farms. Yeah. I'm sure the policy landscape will clear, the fog will clear. Yeah, let's just hope that we get some clarity and certainty.
Well, Ali, that's it. But thank you for your optimism, I would say, probably. And thank you so much for taking us through a little journey through apples and hops today. And and happy Apple Day to you as well.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, Ben. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
That's been my pleasure. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the show. Tell everyone you know about it. And you can also now join the Meet the Farmers Supporters Club on Patreon. To support, simply visit patreon.com/Meet the Farmers. On our sister podcast, Rural Business Focus, this week, I'm joined by a PT, Tony Eilert, and we're talking about physical fitness and the impact it has on your mindset, motivation, and mental well-being. I love doing that with Tony. He is an absolute joy to talk to. Please do head over to that. That's out tomorrow. And you can find it wherever you're listening to this podcast. Next week on Meet the Farmers, we'll be in the Yorkshire Dales, and the Yorkshire Shepherdess, Amanda Owen, will be on the show. From Channel 5 to Meet the Farmers, she gets everywhere. I hope you can join me for that then. I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all have a great week.